They say the most dangerous person in any marriage is the one who already knows how it ends. On the night of their 7th anniversary, Ryan Calloway sat across from his mistress at his own Michelin-starred restaurant, confident, comfortable, untouchable. He had no idea that every candle on every table had been lit by his wife, that she had chosen this night, this room, and this moment long before he ever walked through the door. Nora Calloway wasn't waiting at home. She was already holding the deed to everything he thought was his. The dashboard clock of the black Escalade read 7:28 p.m. when Ryan Calloway finally straightened his tie for the 3rd time. He didn't need to. It was already perfect. It always was. Through the tinted windshield, Callaway Prime glowed against the Chicago night like something out of a magazine spread, warm amber light spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of glow that said money without ever having to announce it. River North on a Saturday evening had its own particular energy, the charged electric hum of a city that knew how to dress up and show out. And Callaway Prime sat right at the center of it, the way Ryan liked everything in his life, front and center, impossible to ignore. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message. "I'm outside. Table 7. Best seat in the house." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "On my way in now. Can't wait." Ryan smiled and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. Table 7. He had chosen it himself when the restaurant was still just blueprints and borrowed money. Corner position elevated platform, slight distance from the main floor, close enough to feel the energy of the room, far enough to feel above it. 7 years of Saturday nights, and that table had hosted investors, celebrities, city aldermen. Tonight, it would host something more personal. He stepped out of the car. The November air hit him clean and cold, carrying the faint smell of the Chicago River 2 blocks over. He rolled his shoulders, once adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the entrance, with the particular ease of a man who had never once in his adult life felt out of place anywhere. The door opened before he reached it. "Mr. Calloway." The young host, new hire, Ryan couldn't remember his name, gave a practiced nod of welcome. "Your guest has just been seated." "Perfect." Ryan stepped inside without breaking stride. The room was doing what it always did on a Saturday, performing. Every table full, every conversation threaded with laughter, and the soft percussion of silverware on fine china. The lighting was calibrated to make everyone look their best, a trick Ryan had learned from a restaurant consultant in New York who charged $300 an hour and was worth every cent. Somewhere near the bar, a jazz quartet was working through something slow and unhurried that made the whole room feel like a movie set. Vanessa Marceau was already seated at table 7, studying the menu with the focused expression of someone who had memorized it 100 times, but still found something new to consider. She had traded her chef's whites for a burgundy dress, dark hair down instead of pulled back. Without the kitchen behind her, she looked younger, softer. She looked up when she heard him approach and smiled. "You look like you own the place," she said. "I do own the place." He pulled out his chair and sat across from her. A server materialized at his elbow with the quiet efficiency Ryan paid for. Before the young man could speak, Ryan said, "The Chateau Petrus, 2015. A pause. "And tell Thomas we're in no rush tonight." "Of course, Mr. Calloway." The server disappeared. Ryan leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, and let his eyes move across the room the way a man surveys something he built. Every detail landed exactly where he intended it. The floral arrangements, the spacing between tables, the way the kitchen noise dissolved before it reached the dining floor. 7 years of work distilled into one room. His phone buzzed against his chest. He glanced down at the screen, just long enough to read the name. Nora. He pressed the side button once. The buzzing stopped. He tucked the phone away and reached for the water glass. "Sorry," he said, not sounding particularly sorry. "Work." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. That was one of the things he appreciated about her. She had good instincts about when not to ask questions. A few minutes later, Thomas Reeves came through the kitchen door, carrying the bottle himself, a gesture reserved for Ryan's most important evenings. Thomas had been at Callaway Prime since the beginning, back when the walk-in refrigerator broke twice a month and the entire staff fit around one folding table for pre-service meetings. He was 32 now, broad-shouldered, with the unhurried competence of someone who had grown up in professional kitchens. Ryan trusted him the way you trust a piece of equipment that has never once let you down. "Chef." Ryan nodded at the bottle. Thomas presented it with both hands, the label facing out. 2015 was a good year, he said simply, and began to open it with the practiced movements of someone who had done it 1,000 times. He poured. Ryan swirled, tasted. "Perfect," Ryan said. Thomas smiled the same easy, warm smile he had offered every Saturday for 9 years. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Callaway." He gathered the foil and the cork and walked back toward the kitchen without hurrying. Ryan lifted his glass toward Vanessa. "To new beginnings," he said. She touched her glass to his. The crystal rang out clean and bright, dissolving into the ambient hum of the room. Neither of them noticed Thomas pause just inside the kitchen doorway. He set the foil and cork on the nearest counter, reached into his apron pocket, and pulled out his phone. His thumbs moved quickly across the screen, a short message, deliberate, unhesitating. He read it once, hit send. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, picked up his knife, and went back to work. The smile on his face was small and quiet. It was not the same smile he had given Ryan Callaway. 8 years before that Saturday night, on the 47th floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, a 29-year-old woman named Nora Hayes was doing something that made her colleagues mildly uncomfortable. She was reading a financial prospectus, the way other people read fiction, not scanning, not highlighting key figures to revisit later. Reading front to back, line by line, the way you read something when you genuinely want to know how it ends. Her desk at Goldman Sachs was the second from the window, which meant on clear mornings she could see the Hudson if she leaned slightly to the left. She rarely leaned. There was always something more interesting on the page in front of her. Nora had grown up understanding money, the way some kids grow up understanding music. Not as a subject to be studied, but as a language spoken at the dinner table. Her father, James Hayes, had spent 30 years building a reputation on Wall Street that most men twice his ambition never achieved. He was the kind of man who could look at a balance sheet and tell you not just what a company was worth, but what it was afraid of. He had passed that gift to his daughter with the same quiet intentionality he applied to everything, not through lectures, but through Saturday mornings at the kitchen table with the newspaper spread between them, coffee going cold, the two of them picking apart earnings reports, the way other families did crossword puzzles. By 29, Nora Hayes could walk into a boardroom full of men who had been doing this since before she was born and find the thing they had missed. She did it without fanfare. She did it without needing them to notice. Which is why, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday in October, when a 30-year-old restaurant owner from Chicago walked into her office for a consultation on financing his first expansion, she barely looked up from her screen. "Mr. Callaway," she said, in the tone of someone who had 3 other meetings that afternoon. "Sit down. Tell me about the asset." Ryan Callaway had walked into a lot of rooms. He had a quality that most people registered within the first 30 seconds, a particular confidence that occupied space without asking permission. He sat down. He opened his folder. He started talking. Nora listened for about 90 seconds before she interrupted him. "Your food cost percentage is wrong," she said, turning her monitor toward him. "You've been calculating it on gross revenue. It should be net. That's a 4-point difference, which means your actual margin is closer to 18%, not 22%. That changes your borrowing capacity." Ryan stopped talking. He looked at the screen. He looked at her. "Nobody has caught that," he said. Not defensive, genuinely surprised. "I know," Nora said, and turned the monitor back. He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. By December, the consultations had drifted past business hours and into dinner. And somewhere between the financing conversations and the long walks along the waterfront in weather that was too cold for either of them to be comfortable. Something shifted in the specific way that things shift when two people stop pretending they are there for the original reason. 18 months later, they got married in a small ceremony at a venue on the North Shore of Chicago on a September afternoon when the lake was the color of hammered steel and the leaves were just beginning to turn. It was by every visible measure a beautiful day. James Hayes spent most of it watching his son-in-law work the room, shaking hands with the ease of a man who had been practicing since childhood, laughing at exactly the right moments, touching Nora's arm in that proprietary way that looked like affection and might have been something else entirely. 20 minutes before the ceremony, James found his daughter in the small anteroom where she was having her veil adjusted. He waited until they were alone. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want you to actually hear it, not just listen to it." Nora met his eyes in the mirror. "Dad, a man who wants your brain today," James Hayes said quietly, "may resent it tomorrow." She turned to face him. She was smiling, the particular smile she used when she had already considered an argument and decided it wasn't going to land. "He's not like that." Her father looked at her for a long moment. He had the eyes of someone who had spent decades reading things people didn't intend to show. He did not smile back. He simply nodded, adjusted his pocket square, and offered her his arm. "All right," he said. "Let's get you married." The hotel suite the following morning was still and pale with early light. Ryan was asleep, one arm across the pillow, breathing the deep and uncomplicated breath of a man without a single outstanding concern. Nora was already awake. She sat at the writing desk in the corner, with her laptop open, still in the hotel robe, her hair loose. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes. On the screen in front of her was the login page for a private investment account she had opened 6 months earlier, under her maiden name, at a bank with no connection to any account she shared with Ryan. She transferred $50,000 money she had saved before the wedding money that had always been hers into that account. The confirmation screen appeared. She read it once, closed the laptop. Outside the window, the city was just beginning its morning. Somewhere below, a delivery truck backed up with a steady mechanical beep, and a dog walker crossed the intersection, with 4 leashes fanned out like a hand of cards. Nora looked at her husband's reflection in the dark mirror of the laptop screen. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and let the morning come in. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't suspicious. She was simply the daughter of a man who had spent 30 years teaching her that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was confuse love with the absence of caution. She had loved Ryan Calloway completely, and she had kept one door locked. Her father had taught her that was not a contradiction. 14 months before that Saturday night, Nora Calloway's Tuesday had started the way most of her Tuesdays did, quietly, practically, without drama. Ryan had left for the office at 7. Their son, James, 4 years old, and entirely committed to his current obsession with construction vehicles, had been parked in front of the television since 8, with a bowl of cereal going soggy beside him. The house in Lincoln Park had that particular Tuesday morning quality, settled, unhurried, the kind of calm that comes when a family has fallen into a routine so comfortable it stops feeling like anything at all. Nora sat at the kitchen island with her laptop, working through the household filing. Tax season was 2 months out, and she liked to have everything organized well in advance, receipts, sorted accounts, reconciled, nothing left to scramble for in April. It was the kind of task that looked like housework from the outside, but required, if you did it properly, the same methodical attention she had once applied to earnings reports on the 47th floor of a building in Lower Manhattan. She opened the shared family email. She was looking for a receipt from their home warranty company, which she was fairly certain had come through sometime in October. She scrolled. Utility confirmation. School newsletter. A promotional offer from a wine club Ryan had signed up for and never canceled. Then, a subject line that didn't belong. Reservation confirmation. The Four Seasons. Chicago Suite. 1408. She almost kept scrolling. Almost. She clicked it open. The confirmation was dated 3 weeks prior for a Friday night stay. The name on the reservation read Ryan Calloway. The additional guest field, which most people left blank, read Vanessa Marceau. Nora read the email once. Then she read it again, the way she read everything, completely, without rushing, making sure she understood exactly what was in front of her. Then she closed the laptop. She sat with her hands flat on the counter for a moment, feeling the cool of the marble under her palms. The television in the next room was narrating something about excavators. Outside, a city bus hissed to a stop on the street below. The refrigerator made its low, mechanical hum. She stood up, walked to the coffee maker, selected a mug from the cabinet, the plain white one, not the one James had painted for her at a school art project 2 years ago. She wasn't sure why that distinction mattered, but it did. She measured the coffee. She pressed the button. She waited. When it was ready, she poured it slowly, watching the steam rise. Small footsteps on the hardwood, then a warm weight against her leg. Her son James looked up at her, with the frank, unfiltered assessment that only 4-year-olds are capable of. He had Ryan's dark eyes, and her tendency to go quiet when something was wrong. "Mommy," he said. "Are you okay? You look funny." Nora set the mug down. She crouched to his level, which put them nearly eye to eye. Up close, he smelled like cereal, and that specific variety of little boy warmth that she had never found a word for, and suspected she never would. "Mommy's fine, baby," she said. Her voice came out exactly the way she intended. Steady, unhurried, completely haute. "Go watch your show." He studied her for one more second with those serious, dark eyes. Then he turned and padded back toward the living room, apparently satisfied. Nora straightened up. She drank her coffee, standing at the counter, looking at nothing in particular. She drank all of it. When the mug was empty, she rinsed it under the tap, worked a small amount of dish soap around the inside with a sponge, rinsed it again, dried it with the dish towel that hung from the oven handle, set it back in the cabinet handle, facing right exactly where it had been before. She pulled out the chair at the kitchen island and sat back down. She opened the laptop. She did not reopen the confirmation email. There was no need. She had read it twice. She understood it completely. It was not, she recognized with a certain grim clarity, the kind of thing that benefited from being looked at a third time. Instead, she opened a new tab. Her fingers found the keys without hurrying, pressing each one with the same even pressure she used for everything. The way her father had typed, she remembered now, always deliberate, always exact, as though the act of putting something into words was itself a commitment. How to value a restaurant group for acquisition. She hit enter. The results loaded. She began to read. There were no tears. Not because she was holding them back, not because she was too shocked to feel anything, but because somewhere between the coffee maker and the cabinet and the dish towel, folded back exactly into place, Nora Calloway had made a decision so clean and so complete that there was simply nothing left to cry about. The question had been answered. What remained now was the work. 12 months before that Saturday night, the back office of Calloway Prime smelled the way it always did after a dinner service: garlic and reduction sauce, and the particular metallic undertone of a professional kitchen that never fully aired out, no matter how long you left the door open. Vanessa Marceau had been working late again. That was not unusual. She had been working late since the week she arrived from Lyon 3 years ago, hired away from a 2-star establishment by an offer that was generous enough to be interesting in a kitchen that turned out to be exactly as good as advertised. She had built something here. Her menu, her team, her rhythms. The walk-in was organized her way. The prep schedule ran on her timeline. Even the most senior line cooks had learned to read her silences correctly, which was the truest measure of a kitchen's maturity. She was reviewing invoices at the small desk in the corner when she noticed the photograph. It had always been there, she supposed, propped against the wall beside the monitor, half hidden by a stack of vendor folders. She had simply never looked at it directly before. But tonight, For reasons she couldn't entirely account for, she picked it up. 3 people on a beach somewhere warm. Ryan, in a white linen shirt, relaxed in a way she rarely saw him. Beside him, a woman composed, dark-haired, with the kind of self-possession that didn't need to announce itself. And between them, a small boy of maybe 2 or 3, squinting into the sun with the concentrated joy of a child who has just discovered sand. They looked, all 3 of them, entirely like a family. Vanessa set the photograph down. She sat with that for a moment. Then she went and found Ryan in his office. "You told me it was over," she said. She kept her voice level. She was good at that. Ryan looked up from his phone. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. More like the slight recalibration of a man who has been asked a question he has answered before and finds the repetition mildly inconvenient. "It is over," he said. "Emotionally, it's been over for years. The paperwork is it's complicated, Vanessa. These things take time." She stood in the doorway and looked at him. She had heard those words before, or variations of them, and each time she had accepted the explanation, the way you accept a weather forecast. Not because you fully trust it, but because the alternative is standing in the rain, arguing with the sky. But something about tonight was different. Maybe it was the photograph. Maybe it was the specific flatness in his voice, the way the words came out already shaped, already practiced, like lines delivered, rather than thoughts expressed. For the first time, she heard Ryan Calloway speak and understood that she was not hearing him think. She was hearing him perform. She went back to the desk. She returned to the invoices. It was 3 weeks later, on a night when the restaurant had gone quiet, and she was cross-referencing a supplier contract against their delivery records, that she found the discrepancy. 6 supply agreements, spread across 8 months, each one routing a different vendor payment through an authorization she did not recognize. The contact name on every single one was hers. The signatory line on every single one carried a version of her signature close enough to pass a casual review wrong, in the specific way that a copy is always wrong when you know the original. She had not signed any of them. She pulled all 6 and laid them side by side on the desk, her chef's instinct for pattern recognition doing the work her conscious mind was still catching up to. Same formatting, same routing structure, same authorization code. 6 contracts, totaling, she ran the numbers twice, just over $2 million in redirected vendor payments over 8 months. Her name, her supposed signature, her professional reputation used as a vehicle for something she had never agreed to and never seen. She sat very still for a long time. Then she took out her phone. She opened the search function and typed the word attorney. And then, because she had always been precise about what she needed, added employment contract dispute. Chicago. The results populated. She scrolled without hurrying, reading firm names and practice descriptions, the way she read a new menu, looking for the thing that fit the specific combination of qualities that matched the particular problem in front of her. She stopped on one listing: Eleanor Walsh, family and corporate law, 20 years of experience in asset protection and contractual dispute resolution. Vanessa read the description twice. She saved the number to her contacts under a name that wasn't Eleanor Walsh, because she was careful that way and always had been. She did not call, not yet. She set the phone face down on the desk, gathered the 6 contracts into a neat stack, and clipped them together. Then she turned off the desk lamp, locked the office, and walked back through the dark kitchen toward the exit. Her footsteps, the only sound in a building that an hour ago had been full of noise and motion, in the particular controlled chaos that she had spent 3 years learning to love. At the door she paused. Behind her, the kitchen held its breath. She pushed through into the night air and kept walking steadily, without looking back, the way you walk. When you have just understood something, you cannot ununderstand. And the only reasonable response is to keep moving forward. 13 months before that Saturday night, the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor of a building on West Madison Street, and Nora Calloway walked out carrying 3 things: a leather portfolio, a thermos of black coffee, and the particular composure of a woman who had spent the last 30 days preparing for a conversation she intended to have exactly once. The offices of Eleanor Walsh occupied the southeast corner of the floor, a deliberate choice, Nora suspected, for a woman whose entire professional life was built around seeing things from multiple angles simultaneously. The receptionist showed her in without preamble. Eleanor Walsh was already standing. She was in her mid-40s, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of unhurried stillness that courtrooms produce in the people who survive them. She shook Nora's hand with a firm, brief grip and gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "tell me what you need." Nora appreciated that. No small talk, no preliminary sympathy, just the work. She set the portfolio on the desk and opened it. Inside, arranged in the order she intended to present them, were 12 months of financial documentation, tax, filings, asset registrations, business valuations, incorporation records, and a 30-page analysis of Calloway Group's equity structure that she had compiled herself over 4 consecutive weekends, while Ryan was at the restaurant and James was at her mother's. "My husband owns a hospitality group," Nora began. 4 locations, 1 in development, gross annual revenue of approximately $11 million. The primary holding company is structured as an ELLC. With a board of 3, Ryan holds controlling interest. The remaining 2 seats are occupied by silent partners who have not attended a meeting in 2 years. She turned a page. "I want to acquire majority control of that company, legally, completely, and without his knowledge, until the transaction is finalized." Eleanor looked at the documents. She looked at Nora. "Why not file for separation?" she asked. "Given what you've described, the asset division would likely favor you substantially." "Because separation requires disclosure," Nora said. "And disclosure gives him time to restructure, move things around, make himself a smaller target." She turned another page. "I'm not interested in chasing him. I'm interested in arriving before he knows I'm coming." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone recalibrating, adjusting their initial read of a situation against new information. Then she picked up her pen. "Walk me through the equity structure," she said. They worked for an hour and 40 minutes. Nora answered every question without hesitation, referenced documents by tab number, and corrected Eleanor twice on points of LLC governance that the attorney acknowledged with a slight nod and no embarrassment. By the time they reached the financing section, the thermos was half empty, and Eleanor had filled 4 pages of her yellow legal pad. "You'll need a holding entity," Eleanor said. "Something with no visible connection to you or your family. Delaware is the cleanest option. Minimal disclosure requirements, established case law." "I know someone," Nora said. She was already reaching for her phone. She dialed her father. James Hayes picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, promptly, without greeting, as though telephone calls were simply meetings that began the moment the line connected. "I need your Delaware contact," Nora said. "And I need 20 minutes. There was a brief pause. Not surprise. Her father did not surprise easily. "Tell me the numbers," he said. She told him. All of them. The valuation, the equity breakdown, the acquisition timeline. She had mapped across the next 10 to 12 months. The financing structure that would draw from her premarital savings and a private investment vehicle James had established for her years ago that Ryan had never known about and never thought to ask. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted, because she knew his rhythms. "The Delaware contact is a man named Sutherland," he said. "I'll send you his information this afternoon. Tell him I referred you, and he'll move it to the front." Another pause, shorter this time, but weighted differently. "Nora, before we go further, there's something about Ryan I should have told you a long time ago. A woman named Margaret." "I know the name, Dad." Silence. "How long?" he asked. "Long enough," she said. "That's not what this call is about." The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full. The kind of silence that carries everything 2 people have decided, mutually, and without discussion, not to say out loud. "I tried to tell you," he said finally. "Before the wedding, you told me I told you not to. Nora's voice was even. I know. I made that choice. A beat. Just help me with the numbers, Dad. Another silence. Then, Sutherland. This afternoon. Thank you. She ended the call and set the phone on Eleanor's desk. Across from her, the attorney had stopped writing. She was looking at Nora with an expression that had shifted somewhere in the last several minutes, moved past professional assessment into something less categorizable, something that had more to do with the particular way certain people recognize each other across a conference table when both of them understand, without needing to say it, that they are operating at the same altitude. How long have you been building this? Eleanor asked. Nora picked up her thermos. Long enough, she said again. Now, let's talk about the acquisition timeline. Eleanor looked at her for one more second. Then she turned to a fresh page on her legal pad, clicked her pen, and got back to work. The coffee shop, 2 blocks from Callaway Prime, was the kind of place that had been there so long. It had stopped trying to be anything in particular. Mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu that hadn't fully changed since 2009, and a corner booth in the back, where the afternoon light came in at an angle that made everything look a little softer than it actually was. Thomas Reeves was already in that booth when Nora arrived. He had his hands wrapped around a mug and his eyes on the table, with the settled stillness of a man who had been sitting with something heavy for long enough that he'd stopped trying to put it down. He was 32, broad across the shoulders, in the way that kitchen work produces over years, not from a gym, but from 10,000 mornings of lifting and carrying and standing at a station for 8 hours without complaint. He looked up when she sat across from him. He did not say anything. Nora set a folder onto the table between them. It was not thick. Gerald Reeves's employment record at Callaway Prime fit into 11 pages. 31 years of industry experience, condensed into a hire date, a job title, a salary, history, and a single termination notice dated 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. The kind of document that reduced a man's professional life to the width of a thumb. Thomas looked at the folder. He did not open it. You know what's in there, Nora said. It was not a question. Yeah, he said. I know. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days earlier, Gerald Reeves had arrived at Callaway Prime at 5:45 in the morning, the same time he had arrived every working day for 15 years. He was 61 years old. He had built the original menu from scratch, not from a concept document or a consultant's brief, but from memory and instinct, and 30 years of knowing what people actually wanted to eat when they sat down in a room that made them feel for a few hours like everything in their lives was exactly as it should be. The bouillabaisse that had earned Callaway Prime its first serious review. The dry-aged preparation that the Tribune's food critic had described in a sentence Gerald had read so many times, he no longer needed to look it up as the most honest piece of cooking in the city. He had his coat off and his apron on before 6. He was reviewing the day's delivery manifest when Ryan's assistant appeared in the kitchen doorway and told him, with the particular discomfort of someone delivering news they had not written, that Mr. Callaway would like to see him upstairs. Ryan's office was warm and smelled of good coffee. Ryan was standing at the window when Gerald came in, a staging choice Gerald understood later that put the light behind him and made the conversation easier to control. Gerald, Ryan turned. He had the expression of a man practicing empathy. Sit down. Gerald sat. Ryan explained, with the smooth efficiency of someone who had rehearsed that the restaurant group was moving in a new direction, evolving the concept. There was a chef coming in from Paris, young Michelin-trained, with a modern sensibility that matched where the brand needed to go. The decision was not a reflection of Gerald's contribution, which had been, Ryan said, invaluable. There would be a severance package. The paperwork was already prepared. He slid a folder across the desk. Gerald looked at it for a moment. He thought about the bouillabaisse. He thought about the Tribune review folded in his wallet until the crease went soft. He thought about 15 years of 5 45 mornings, and the particular satisfaction of a kitchen running exactly right. Then he picked up the pen and signed. He went back downstairs. He took off his apron and folded it over the pass the way he always did at the end of a shift. He collected his personal items from his locker: a photograph, a spare set of reading glasses, a small container of the spice blend he mixed himself and kept on hand for the bouillabaisse. He walked through the kitchen toward the back exit. He did not look back. Thomas was at his station when his father passed. He watched him go. He did not call after him. Later, he would not be able to fully explain why, only that something in the way his father was walking told him that being called after was not what Gerald Reeves needed in that moment. 10 seconds later, Ryan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He walked over to Thomas and put a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was probably intended to feel like solidarity. "Your dad had a good run," Ryan said. "You're the future of this kitchen, Thomas. I want you to know that." Thomas looked at him. He arranged his face into something that passed for acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," he said. Ryan nodded and went back upstairs. Thomas turned back to his station. He picked up his knife. He resumed his prep work cutting with the same clean, even strokes he used every day, and he did not allow his hands to shake, because a shaking hand is a dangerous thing in a professional kitchen, and Gerald Reeves had raised him to be careful with sharp objects. Back in the corner booth, the afternoon light had shifted slightly. Nora placed a second document on top of the folder. A check the severance payment Ryan had verbally committed to during Gerald's termination meeting, and never in 3 years, and 2 months, and 14 days, actually processed. Thomas looked at it. He looked at the folder beneath it. Then he looked at Nora, with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular conversation and is now finally having it. "I'm not asking you to betray anyone," Nora said. Her voice was quiet and entirely steady. "I'm asking you to help me make sure he can't do this to anyone else." The coffee shop hummed around them, the machine behind the counter, a muffled conversation from the next table, the faint sound of traffic on the street outside. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a Tuesday afternoon that had no idea what was being decided in a corner booth in the back. Thomas looked at the check one more time. Then he looked up. He nodded. No hesitation, no conditions, no further words required. Nora picked up her coffee. Thomas picked up his. Outside, the afternoon carried on, without them entirely unaware that something had just been set in motion that would not stop until it had run its full and necessary course. NHC Capital LLC was incorporated in the state of Delaware on a Thursday afternoon in October in the offices of a registered agent named Sutherland, who had been doing this kind of work for 26 years and had learned long ago that the less he knew about his client's intentions, the better everyone slept. The paperwork took 40 minutes. The filing fee was $270. By 4 o'clock, the company existed on paper, in a database, in the particular legal sense that means a thing is real without being visible. No office, no staff, no public profile, no connection traceable by any standard search to a woman named Nora Calloway or anyone related to her. Just a name, NHC Capital. 3 letters that meant nothing to anyone who didn't already know, and everything to the one person who had chosen them, with the quiet precision of someone leaving a signature in a place only she would ever think to look. Nora Hayes Calloway. She had always liked the idea that the most important things could be hidden in plain sight if you arranged them correctly. The strategy was not complicated. It was simply disciplined in a way that most people could not sustain. Every transaction through NHC Capital was kept below the threshold that triggers mandatory disclosure. Never more than 4.9% of outstanding shares in a single purchase, never through the same brokerage, twice in the same quarter, never in a volume that would cause the kind of pattern recognition that financial compliance departments are paid to notice. The capital came from 2 sources: the private savings account Nora had maintained since before her marriage, and a separate investment vehicle her father had established for her years ago structured in a way that kept it entirely outside the marital estate. Ryan had never asked about either. It had not occurred to him to ask, which was, Nora had come to understand, a form of answer in itself. Every week, without fail, a package of documents arrived in Eleanor's encrypted system. Internal, financial reports, vendor agreements, board communications, updated asset registers. Thomas moved them with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent 9 years learning where everything was kept and had never, until now, considered what that knowledge was worth. Nora processed each package the same way. After James was in bed, after the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, she would open her laptop at the desk in the spare room and work. Not for an hour, not until she was tired. Until she had extracted everything the documents had to offer and entered it into the model she was building, a living map of Callaway Group's financial anatomy, updated weekly, precise to a degree that Ryan's own CFO had probably never achieved. The spare room had no particular character. She had never decorated it. It held a desk, a chair, a filing cabinet, and whatever was in front of her. The laptop screen in the dark made a pale rectangle of light that she worked inside of, methodically, without drama, the way her father had always worked, as though the numbers were the only company she needed. October became November. November became the new year. The share percentage climbed. 11%, 19, 27. In February, one of the brokerage accounts flagged an inquiry from Callaway Group's financial team. A routine audit, nothing targeted. Eleanor handled it in 48 hours, through a response so technically unremarkable that the inquiry closed without escalation. Nora noted it in her log and continued. 34%, 41, 46. There were evenings when James would wake up and pad down the hallway and appear in the doorway of the spare room, trailing his blanket, wanting water or reassurance, or simply the specific comfort of knowing where his mother was. She would close the laptop, take him back to bed, sit with him until his breathing slowed back into sleep. Then she would return to the desk and open the laptop and pick up exactly where she had left off. She did not think of it as sacrifice. She thought of it as precision. Every hour at the desk was an hour the model got more accurate. Every percentage point acquired was a percentage point that could not be moved, hidden, or negotiated away. 48, 49, 50. The call came on a Tuesday night in August at 11:14, while Nora was reviewing a revised asset register that Thomas had passed through the previous afternoon. Nora. Eleanor's voice carried the particular quality of someone delivering news they have been waiting a long time to deliver. We just crossed 51%. Nora set down the document she was holding. She looked at the screen. At the model she had been building for 10 months, the acquisition structure mapped across 47 tabs, every number sourced and verified, every transaction logged to the centie. Schedule the board notification, she said. 72 hours from now, standard regulatory window. Already drafted, Eleanor said. I'll send it in the morning. Good. A pause. Thank you, Eleanor. Get some sleep, Eleanor said, and ended the call. Nora closed the laptop. The spare room went dark. She sat for a moment, in the quiet, not triumphant, not relieved, simply present in the way you are present when something large and long carried has finally arrived at its destination. Then she stood, walked down the hallway, and pushed open the door to James's room. He was asleep on his side, one arm around the stuffed bear that had been his preferred companion since he was 18 months old. The nightlight cast everything in a low amber glow. He had Ryan's dark lashes and her father's forehead, and the specific, uncomplicated peace of a child who has not yet learned that the world requires guarding against. Nora stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she crossed the room, reached down, and pulled the blanket up over his shoulder, where it had slipped. She stayed another few seconds, just watching him breathe. Then she straightened, walked back to the door, and turned off the nightlight on her way out. In the hallway in the dark, she nodded once, to no one, to nothing, to the 10 months of Tuesday nights and early mornings, and carefully arranged numbers that had added up finally to exactly what she had needed them to add up to. Done. The view from the 12th floor of the Callaway Group building had always been one of Ryan's quiet satisfactions. The Chicago River, below the bridge traffic, the skyline arranging itself against whatever the lake decided to do with the light that day. He had chosen this office specifically for that view. It reminded him on the days when the work was grinding and the margins were tight and the partners were difficult of exactly how far he had come from the single-unit restaurant he had opened with borrowed money and a menu printed at a copy shop on Wacker Drive. He was looking at that view when Derek Mills knocked. Derek Mills had been Callaway Group's head of finance for 6 years, a precise, methodical man of 44, who communicated primarily through spreadsheets and whose emotional range, in Ryan's experience, ran from mildly concerned to professionally neutral. Ryan had never seen him look the way he looked when he opened the door. "We have a problem, sir." Ryan turned from the window. He registered Derek's expression, the particular pallor of a man who has checked his numbers 3 times, hoping to find an error, and has not found one, and felt the first faint shift of something in his chest. Not alarm, not yet, just the specific attentiveness of a man whose instincts have been in the room longer than his conscious mind. "Sit down," Ryan said. "Tell me." Derek opened his folder on the desk between them and began. An investment fund called NHC Capital had been acquiring shares in Callaway Group for the past 8 months. Not in large blocks, never more than 4.9% in a single transaction, spread across multiple brokerages, timed in a pattern that stayed consistently below mandatory disclosure thresholds. The purchases were, Derek explained with the careful neutrality of a man delivering a verdict he did not write, entirely legal. Every regulatory requirement had been met. The board had been formally notified 72 hours ago per standard protocol. NHC Capital currently held 51.3% of outstanding shares. Ryan looked at the numbers. "Who authorized the board notification?" he asked. "It came through Eleanor Walsh's office," Derek said. "Family and corporate law. The filing is clean. I've had Patrick review it." Patrick Horn, Ryan's attorney, for the past 9 years, a senior partner at one of the oldest firms in the Loop, was already on his way up. He arrived 4 minutes later, set his briefcase on the conference table by the window, and spent the next 20 minutes confirming, with the measured precision of a man who understood that some news needed to be delivered slowly, what Derek had already said. The transaction was airtight. The regulatory filings were complete. The ownership transfer was, as of 72 hours ago, a matter of legal record. "Can we challenge the valuation?" Ryan asked. "On what grounds?" Patrick said. "The purchases were at market rate. Every single one. The board notification was proper notice given. 72 hours, as required, to the letter. There has to be something." "Ryan," Patrick set down his pen. In 9 years, he had never interrupted a client mid-sentence. "There is nothing. Whatever this is, it was constructed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly how to do it, without leaving a single opening." Ryan stood. He walked to his desk. He pulled up the company banking portal on his monitor and entered his credentials. Access denied. He stared at the screen, entered them again carefully. Access denied. Contact your account administrator. He pulled out his phone, opened his personal banking application, navigated to the wire transfer function. "This account has been frozen by court order. For assistance, contact your legal representative." The phone felt suddenly heavier than it should have. He scrolled to Nora's name and pressed call. The line did not ring. It went directly to a recording. Not her voicemail, not her voice at all. Just the standard carrier's message that plays when a number has been made temporarily unreachable. He called again. Same recording. He set the phone on the desk. He looked at Patrick, who was looking at the middle distance with the careful blankness of a man who has understood something his client has not yet fully processed. NHC Capital, Ryan said. His voice came out almost conversational. Who filed the incorporation? Patrick opened his briefcase and produced a single sheet. Registered in Delaware. The listed agent is a firm called Sutherland Associates. The beneficial owner, he paused. Not for effect. The way a person pauses when they are deciding whether the next sentence will change everything, is listed as N. Hayes Calloway. The room did something strange. Not the room exactly, the quality of the air in it, the way sound moved through it. Ryan looked at the sheet. He looked at the 3 letters at the top of the fund name, NHC. He said it once quietly, the way you say something when you are testing whether it is real. NHC, a beat. Nora Hayes Calloway. Derek looked at the table. Patrick looked at the window. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that either of them could usefully add to what had just happened in the room. Ryan walked to the window. Below, the city was doing what it always did on a Thursday afternoon, moving, transacting, carrying on with the 10,000 ordinary tasks that make up a day in a place that size. Delivery trucks, pedestrians, a water taxi working its way along the river, all of it indifferent, unhurried, entirely unaware of the 12th floor. He stood there for a long time. He did not raise his voice. He did not put his hand through anything. He simply stood at the window, where he had always stood when he needed to remember how far he had come, and understood with a clarity that arrived not like a shock, but like a slow and total tide, that the distance he had traveled and the ground he was standing on were no longer the same thing. His phone buzzed against the desk. He did not move for a moment. Then he turned, walked back, and picked it up. A message. From Nora. The first communication in 48 hours, arriving now with the timing of something that had been scheduled, rather than sent, precise, deliberate, placed exactly where it would land, with maximum effect. Don't be late tonight, darling. Table 7, 8 o'clock. I made the reservation myself. Ryan read it once. Then he read it again. The candle. The phrasing. I made the reservation myself. At his restaurant. At his table. In the room he had built. He set the phone down very carefully. The way you set something down when you are not entirely certain what your hands might do if left without instruction. Outside, Chicago kept moving. The river kept running. The afternoon light shifted on the water the way it always did at this hour, indifferent and unhurried, and entirely without mercy. They say a man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous thing. Ryan Calloway spent 6 hours proving that theory completely wrong. It started in Patrick's office on the 43rd floor of a building 3 blocks from his own, where the 2 of them sat across from each other with a stack of documents between them and worked through every available option with the systematic thoroughness of men who understood that the situation required either a solution or the honest acknowledgement that there wasn't one. Patrick found the honest acknowledgement first. Every angle they tried had already been closed. The transaction structure left no procedural gap to challenge the regulatory filings were complete. The timeline was clean. The share transfers had been executed through legitimate channels with documentation that would hold up under any standard of review. Patrick called in a colleague who specialized in corporate takeover litigation. The colleague spent 40 minutes with the materials, asked 3 questions, and then told them with the directness of someone who charged too much per hour to soften things unnecessarily, that there was no filing they could make that wouldn't be dismissed before the week was out. Ryan thanked him, waited until he left, then turned to Patrick. The offshore accounts, he said. The personal holdings in the Cayman structure, we move everything there before frozen, Patrick said. All of them. Court order issued 71 hours ago through Eleanor Walsh's office, 1 hour before the board notification went out. He paused. She filed the asset preservation order first, Ryan. Before anything else. The accounts were sealed before you even knew the shares had moved. Ryan sat with that for a moment. Thomas, he said, and reached for his phone. He called the number he had saved, under T. Reeves' kitchen, and listened to it ring 4 times before going to voicemail. He ended the call. Tried again. Voicemail. He typed a message, short, direct, asking Thomas to call him immediately. The message showed delivered. It did not show read. He tried a third time, from the car, pulling out of the parking structure with one hand on the wheel and the phone pressed to his ear, already knowing before the fourth ring that no one was going to answer. The drive to Lincoln Park took 19 minutes in afternoon traffic. He used most of them trying other numbers, the restaurant's main line, the direct line to the back office, a supplier contact who occasionally had information about what was happening inside the building. The restaurant line rang through to a recorded greeting. The back office went to voicemail. The supplier contact picked up, listened for 30 seconds, and then said carefully that he wasn't really in a position to get involved in whatever this was, and wished Ryan the best. The house on Lincoln Park was a 3-story brownstone that Ryan had purchased the year the restaurant group hit 8 figures. A deliberate choice of neighborhood, a deliberate size, a deliberate statement about the kind of man he had become. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment before going in. The front door was unlocked, not forced, not ajar, simply unlocked, the way you leave a door when you are not coming back and locking. It would be a kind of pretense. He went inside. The house was quiet in a way that had weight to it. Not the quiet of an empty afternoon, the quiet of a space that has been deliberately vacated, where the absence of people is not incidental, but intentional. The living room was intact. The kitchen was clean. Everything was exactly where it should be, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. He went upstairs. Their bedroom smelled faintly of jasmine, the scent of the product Nora used, the one that had been on the bathroom shelf for 7 years, present in the room. The way certain things become present over time, so gradually that you stop registering them, until they're what remains when everything else is gone. He stood in the center of the room and breathed it in without meaning to. Her side of the closet was empty, not cleared out in haste, organized absence, deliberate, each hanger placed back exactly where it had been, so that the empty space looked considered rather than rushed. He walked down the hall to James's room. The construction vehicles were still arranged on the shelf, the way James kept them by size, largest to smallest a system. He had developed independently at age 3 and defended with surprising conviction ever since. The books were still in the basket by the window. The small table where he did his drawings still had a half-finished sketch of what appeared to be an excavator on it, crayon set neatly beside it, the way Nora always reminded him to leave it. Everything was there. The people were not. Ryan stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back downstairs to the kitchen. The envelope was on the counter, centered, positioned with the same intentionality as everything else Nora did. His name on the front in her handwriting, the clean, undecorated script she used for things that mattered, where other people might reach for emphasis or underline. He opened it. 2 pages. A legal summary, structured like a closing document, asset by asset, account by account, transfer by transfer, each line sourced to the corresponding filing with a reference number. Everything that had been his, listed in the order it had ceased to be. Patrick could have produced the same document. He would have taken 3 days and charged accordingly. Nora had written it in the format of someone who had worked in financial analysis and found clarity more useful than drama. He read both pages. He read them the way she had always read things, completely, without rushing, making sure he understood exactly what was in front of him. At the bottom of the second page below the final line of legal reference numbers, in the same clean handwriting as his name on the envelope. "I'll see you at 8. Wear the blue tie. It photographs well." Ryan read the last sentence twice. Photographs. He understood. Not as a threat, as information delivered in the specific register of someone who wanted to make sure he arrived prepared for what was going to happen, because arriving unprepared would only make it worse. There would be cameras. There would be people with notebooks. There would be a record of tonight that would exist in searchable form long after tonight was over. She had chosen the blue tie. She had thought about how he would look. He set the pages on the counter and walked to the hallway mirror, the one by the front door that he passed every morning without looking at. He looked at it now. The man in the mirror was wearing a shirt that needed changing, and an expression he didn't fully recognize. He stood there for a moment. Then he went upstairs, changed the shirt, and came back to the closet by the front door where he kept his ties. The blue one was on the left. It had always been on the left. His hands were not entirely steady as he lifted it from the rack. He looped it under his collar and began the knot slowly, step by step, the mechanical sequence he had performed 1,000 times, which his hands knew well enough to complete without his full attention. Which was fortunate, because his full attention was somewhere else entirely. He checked his reflection when he was done. The tie was straight. He looked, he supposed, like himself, like the version of himself that had walked into rooms for 15 years, expecting them to rearrange around his arrival. He looked at the clock on the wall, 6:47 p.m. He picked up his jacket, put it on, and walked to the front door. He opened it. The evening air came in cool, carrying the smell of the neighborhood, the particular combination of old trees and restaurant exhaust and lake wind that he had paid a significant amount of money to be surrounded by. He stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind him. He did not lock it. There didn't seem to be much point. Callaway Prime had over 7 years hosted a sitting senator, 3 Michelin inspectors, and enough Chicago money to fund a small municipality. It had never hosted anything like this. From the outside, at 8 o'clock on a Saturday evening, it looked exactly as it always did. Warm, amber light through floor-to-ceiling windows. A full dining room, the quiet signal of a place that had learned how to say expensive without ever raising its voice. The November wind moved along the street without interest. Inside, 41 tables were occupied. Every guest had been invited. None of them had been told explicitly why. Most of them had a reasonable idea. Ryan arrived at 8:04. He came through the entrance with Vanessa beside him and took his first read of the room in the practiced way he always did, scanning for problems, finding none. The kitchen was running. The service was moving. The ambient sound was exactly right for a Saturday at capacity. Then he began to look more carefully. Table 3, Marcus Ellery, Senior Vice President at First Chicago Capital, the bank holding Callaway Group's primary line of credit. His eyes moved to the entrance when Ryan walked in and did not immediately return to his plate. Table 8, Sandra Voss, Chief Procurement Officer of Callaway Group's largest supplier network. She did not look toward the entrance at all, which felt more deliberate than if she had. Table 12, Patrick Horn, alone, which Patrick never was at a restaurant of this caliber on a Saturday. A glass of water in front of him and nothing else. When his eyes found Ryan's, he gave a single, small shake of his head. Ryan kept moving toward table 7. He sat, reached for the water glass, with a steadiness he did not entirely feel. Thomas came through the kitchen door a moment later, carrying a bottle with the same unhurried professionalism he brought to everything. He crossed to table 7, poured without being asked, and straightened. For 1 second, just one, his eyes met Ryan's. 9 years. Ryan had looked at this man's face hundreds of times and read nothing in it but reliability. He looked at it now and understood with the particular clarity that arrives too late to be useful, that reliability and loyalty are not the same thing, and he had spent nearly a decade confusing the two. Thomas walked back toward the kitchen without hurrying. Ryan looked around this room again. He counted 8 faces he recognized: bankers, suppliers, a contracts attorney he had worked with, twice the managing editor of a hospitality trade publication. All of them distributed across the dining floor, with the spatial logic of people who had been placed rather than seated. Near the bar, a man with a laptop, open on the high-top surface, caught his attention. In a room where screens were aberrations, a laptop was a statement. The man was somewhere in his 40s with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who make their living watching things happen and writing them down afterward. James Whitfield had covered the Chicago business community for the Tribune for 11 years. Ryan recognized him from a profile piece 2 years ago. that he had read once and preferred not to think about. Whitfield was not looking at Ryan. He was typing, which was somehow worse. The jazz quartet came to the end of a phrase and did not begin the next one. The room went quiet, in the way a theater goes quiet, before the lights drop, not all at once, but inevitably, each table registering the shift and responding to it without being directed. The house lights dimmed slightly, not to darkness, just enough to redirect attention toward the small elevated platform in the far corner, installed 3 years ago for private events, used twice for acoustic performances, currently occupied by a microphone stand that Ryan had not authorized. A figure came through a side door, moving without hurrying, without announcing herself, with the ease of someone who had known exactly where she was going before she left wherever she'd started. She stepped up onto the platform, adjusted the microphone once, looked out at the room. The dress was dark green, unfamiliar. Her hair was up. She looked in the way that people look when they are precisely where they intended to be entirely composed. Her eyes crossed 40 feet of candlelit dining room and found his without searching. She had known where he would be sitting before she walked through the door. Of course she had. She had made the reservation herself. "Good evening." Nora's voice through the microphone was even clear and carried without effort to every corner of the room. "My name is Nora Calloway, and I want to thank each of you for being here tonight, not as dinner guests, but as witnesses." The room absorbed this. Ryan was on his feet before he had decided to stand. The chair scraped back across the hardwood, a sound that cut through the silence in a way that made several people flinch. Every head turned. 41 tables, the full weight of the room landing on him all at once. He looked at his wife across the space he had built in the restaurant that bore his name, surrounded by people who had come here tonight, knowing something he had not known until 48 hours ago. Nora looked back at him with the same expression she had worn 7 years ago, when he had walked into her office and tried to explain his own financial model to her patient, precise and entirely untroubled by whatever he thought he was about to do. "Please sit down, Ryan," she said. The microphone carried it to every corner without effort. "You're a guest in my restaurant." Ryan sat down. The room did not exhale. It simply held what it was holding, that particular suspended quality of a space in which something irreversible has just been said, and everyone present understands, without needing to discuss it, that the next several minutes will determine what kind of evening this turns out to have been. Nora gave it 3 seconds. Then she turned to the screen. It was a standard presentation display, the kind used at board meetings and investor briefings, rolled into position against the far wall with the unobtrusive efficiency of staff who had been given their instructions well in advance. The first slide was a corporate structure diagram. Clean lines, familiar typography. At the top, in the same font used on every Calloway Group document Ryan had ever signed, a single entity name, NHC Capital LLC 51.3% majority shareholder, Calloway Group. 14 months ago, Nora said, "I made a business decision." She moved through the slide without rushing the way she had always moved through financial presentations, letting the numbers do the announcing while her voice handled the explanation. "I identified an undervalued asset. I assessed it thoroughly, and I acquired it through entirely legal means over a period of 10 months without disrupting operations or alerting existing management." She advanced the slide. "The asset," she said, "is this restaurant group." James Whitfield, the Tribune reporter, positioned at the bar, had not looked up from his laptop since Nora began speaking. His fingers moved steadily across the keys, not transcribing. Ryan understood. He had been writing this piece for some time already. Tonight was not research. Tonight was confirmation. The second slide was a timeline. 10 months of transactions, each one annotated with date, broker share volume, and regulatory reference number. It covered the screen from edge to edge, 47 individual purchases, none of them large enough to trigger mandatory disclosure, all of them adding up to the same number, with the patient arithmetic of someone who understood that the distance between 0 and 51% was simply a question of how long you were willing to keep walking. Ryan looked at the timeline. He had seen parts of it Derek had shown him, fragments 2 days ago in the scrambled hour after the disclosure hit. Seeing it complete was different. Seeing it complete in a room full of people projected on a screen in his own restaurant was something else entirely. He put both hands flat on the table. Nora advanced to the third slide. 6 documents appeared, supply agreements, each one displayed side by side with the clean formatting of materials prepared for exactly this kind of presentation. Each one bore a contact name in the supplier field. Each one carried a signature on the authorization line. Vanessa Marceau. Across the room at a two-top, near the window where she had been seated since arriving at 7:45, Vanessa went very still. The color that left her face did not come back. "These 6 supply agreements," Nora said, her tone unchanged from the equity structure slide, were executed over an 8-month period, routing a combined total of $2.3 million through vendor payment channels. Each one carries the name and purported authorization of the executive chef of this establishment. She paused, not for effect, but in the precise way a person pauses when they want what comes next to be heard clearly. None of them were signed by her. Ryan pushed back his chair. Nora, a woman, stepped up onto the platform from the side, measured unhurried, carrying the specific authority of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms where authority was contested and had never once lost her footing. Eleanor Walsh, whose name had appeared on every legal filing in the last 14 months, positioned herself 1 step to Nora's right and looked at Ryan with the professional composure of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and found it entirely unsurprising. Ryan looked at her. He sat back down. Nora turned toward the two-top by the window. "Miss Marceau," her voice, directed across the room, was neither warm nor cold. Simply direct, the register of someone asking a question they already know the answer to and are asking anyway because the record requires it. "You didn't sign these contracts, did you?" Vanessa looked up. Her hands were in her lap. She shook her head once, small definitive. "No," she said. "I never signed anything." The room processed this in silence. "I know," Nora said. She held Vanessa's gaze for 1 more second, something passing between them that was not forgiveness and not absolution, but was perhaps the particular acknowledgement that 2 people can share when they have both been deceived by the same person in different ways. "That's why what happens next is for him, not you." The main doors at the far end of the dining room opened. Richard Moss had served as district attorney for Cook County for 6 years, a deliberate, methodical prosecutor with a record that reflected his preference for cases he was certain of before he filed them. He entered with 2 investigators from his office, both of whom moved with the practiced neutrality of people who had done this before, in rooms considerably less well-appointed, and found the setting irrelevant to the task. Moss surveyed the room briefly, found what he was looking for, began walking. Ryan heard the doors. He turned. He saw Moss. He saw the 2 investigators behind him and understood, in the space between 1 second and the next, what their presence in a restaurant on a Saturday evening meant. He looked around the table. Thomas had positioned himself in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, back straight, blocking the only exit that didn't lead through the main dining floor. He was not looking at Ryan. He was looking at the middle distance with the settled patience of a man who has been waiting for this particular evening for 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, and finds the reality of it exactly as necessary as he always knew it would be. Patrick Horn, at table 12, was studying the tablecloth. Vanessa, at the two-top by the window, had turned her face toward the glass. The investigators reached table 7. Ryan did not move. He looked across the room, past the investigators, past the occupied tables, past the 41 witnesses who had come here tonight, understanding something he had not understood until 2 days ago. He looked at his wife still standing on the platform, still perfectly composed, still occupying the room with the same unhurried authority she had walked in with. "You planned this before Vanessa," he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Not a question, the flat recognition of a man assembling the last pieces of something he should have seen much earlier. Before any of this, Nora looked at him across the length of the room. "We'll talk about that in a moment," she said. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room waiting to be told what to feel. It was the silence of people who already knew and were simply holding it before setting it down somewhere permanent. "How long?" Ryan asked. His voice came out stripped of everything he usually put into it. The boardroom register, the investor confidence, the particular tone that had always made rooms rearrange themselves around his arrival. What remained was just the voice underneath, the one without a strategy. Nora looked at him steadily across the length of the room. "Since the morning after our wedding," she said. A murmur moved through the dining room, not loud. The specific sound of 41 people recalibrating what they thought they had walked into tonight. Ryan shook his head. "That's impossible. You couldn't have known about Vanessa that early." "I didn't," Nora said. The murmur stopped. This was never about Vanessa Ryan. She held his gaze one more second. Then she turned to the screen and advanced to the final slide. It was not a chart, not a transaction record, not any of the financial architecture that had occupied the previous slides. It was a single name centered on a white background in the same clean typography as everything else Nora did, chosen not for drama, but for clarity, because clarity had always been the point. Margaret Ellison. Ryan went very still. Several people at surrounding tables exchanged glances. Sandra Voss set down her water glass. James Whitfield stopped typing. "Margaret Ellison was Ryan's first wife," Nora said. She looked at the room, not at Ryan, but at the witnesses assembled across 41 tables who were now about to understand the full shape of what they'd been invited to see. She invested a substantial portion of her personal inheritance into the first Callaway restaurant, the original location that started everything. When the restaurant succeeded, Ryan filed for dissolution of their marriage. Through a settlement Margaret signed without adequate legal counsel, he retained controlling interest in the business. She received almost nothing. A pause. She was too ashamed to pursue the matter further. Ryan had not moved. He was looking at the name on the screen with the expression of a man watching something approach that he has always known somewhere below. Conscious thought was going to arrive eventually. 3 weeks before our wedding, Nora said, I went to see Margaret. She turned back to Ryan, and the look she gave him across the candlelit room carried something older than anger and quieter than satisfaction. She told me everything, and she asked me for one thing. The room held its breath. She asked me to make sure you couldn't do it again. From table 3, where Marcus Ellery of First Chicago Capital had maintained careful professional neutrality, for the past 40 minutes, a sound began. Single deliberate, 2 hands coming together once. Then again, Sandra Voss joined in. Then the table behind her. Then in the way these things move through a room when the room is ready. It spread not explosive enthusiasm, but the measured acknowledgement of people who have just witnessed something true and are marking it the only way available to them. No one spoke. No one stood. They simply clapped steadily, while Margaret Ellison remained on the screen, behind Nora white letters on white background, as unadorned as the truth it carried. Ryan looked at Patrick, hands flat on the table, not clapping, not looking up. He looked at Thomas in the kitchen doorway, expression unchanged. He looked at Vanessa, turned fully toward the window, her reflection ghosted in the dark glass. The investigators moved. He did not resist. There was nothing left to resist, with no argument that hadn't been answered, no exit that hadn't been closed, no version of the next several minutes that went differently, regardless of what he did. He understood this with the complete clarity of a man who has just watched 14 months of someone else's precision dismantle everything he thought he had built beyond reach. The restraints went on quietly, professionally. He looked at Nora one last time across the candlelight, through the still settling applause, past the 41 witnesses who would carry this evening into their own lives. He looked at the woman who had sat across from him at dinner tables for 7 years and listened and smiled and been. He had always assumed the simpler variable in the equation of their marriage. He kept his voice low enough that it didn't carry past the two of them. Did you ever love me? Nora looked at him. 1 second, 2. The applause had faded. The room was quiet, a different quiet from before, softer, more complex, carrying the weight of a question that no one in the room could fully answer, including the person it was directed at. Nora turned away. She did not answer. She walked back to the microphone, straightened it once with 2 fingers, and looked out at the room with the composed attention of a woman who has one more thing to say and intends to say it clearly. Behind her, Ryan Calloway was led toward the exit, through the dining room he had built, past the tables he had filled between the witnesses his wife had assembled, and out through the front door of a restaurant that would open for service tomorrow under different ownership with Thomas Reeves, having final say over the menu in a room that would remember this particular Saturday long after everything else about it had changed. The door swung shut. The room exhaled. Ryan Calloway walked out of his own restaurant at 9:17 p.m. with his hands secured behind him and the November air hitting his face like something he had not earned the right to complain about. Inside, the jazz quartet, uncertain what else to do, counted themselves back in and began playing again. Something slow, something that filled the space without commenting on it. Outside, Chicago carried on. The vehicle was at the curb. Ryan was guided into the back seat with the practiced efficiency of people who do this regularly and have stopped assigning weight to any particular instance of it. Through the window, Calloway Prime looked exactly as it always had. From this angle, the amber light, the silhouettes, the quiet presentation of a place that knew how to hold itself. He had driven past this building hundreds of times over 7 years, always arriving, never leaving like this. He looked up at the 12th floor of the Calloway Group building across the street. The lights were on. They were always on when he left late. He had always been the one who decided when they went off. Not anymore. James Whitfield was already on the sidewalk, moving with the purposeful calm of a man who has the next 4 hours planned. His camera-long lens flash unit captured the vehicle from 3 angles before the driver pulled into traffic. The flash was still going as they turned the corner. Ryan did not look back. Inside, Dear Richard Moss had taken the seat across from Vanessa at the two-top by the window. He set a folder on the table between them and folded his hands over it with the patience of a man who understood this conversation needed to happen at her pace, not his. Ms. Marceau, he said, I'd like to discuss a cooperation agreement. You're not obligated to speak with me tonight, and you're welcome to have your own counsel present before we proceed. Vanessa looked across the room toward Eleanor Walsh, who was speaking with a member of her team near the platform. As if sensing the attention, Eleanor glanced over and gave a single small nod, the kind that carries a full sentence. You're protected. This is the right move. Vanessa looked back at Moss. I'll tell you everything, she said. The kitchen ran on its own logic, separate from whatever happened in the dining room, governed by its own priorities. Thomas came through the swing door, untying his apron, then reconsidering and tying it back again. The line cooks looked at him with the collective expression of people who had heard enough through the pass-through to know something significant had occurred and were waiting to be told how to respond. Thomas looked back at them. Service isn't over, he said. Table 12 is still waiting on their dessert. A beat. Then the nearest cook turned back to his station. Then the one beside him. Then the whole kitchen went back to work, because the work was still there. Thomas Reeves was still running this kitchen, and some things did not require further discussion. He pulled the dessert tickets from the pass, checked the order, began to plate. At 10:02 p.m., the Tribune's digital edition published under Whitfield's byline, Calloway Hospitality changes hands. The new owner was there all along. 2 photographs accompanied it, the presentation screen showing NHC Capital's ownership structure, and the exterior of the building at 9:17 p.m. The vehicle at the curb, the amber light reflected in wet pavement. Within 20 minutes, it was the most read story of the evening. By 10:30, the dining room had largely emptied. A few tables remained, guests finishing coffee, a couple near the window, in no hurry to leave. Nora stood near the host's stand and watched the room settle. Several guests nodded as they passed on their way out. Not the nod of sympathy, not congratulation, exactly. The nod you give someone you have just watched do something that clarified retroactively a number of things you had always sensed, but never had the framework to name. She accepted each one with a brief tilt of her head and nothing more. Eleanor appeared at her side, coat on bag over her shoulder, the organized exit of a woman who had a full day tomorrow and had known since this morning exactly what time tonight would end. "It's done," Eleanor said. Nora nodded once, then looked at her watch. 10:31 p.m. "I need to go home," she said. "James has school tomorrow." Eleanor held that for a moment. The specific pragmatism of it, the way it landed after an evening that had contained everything and was now being closed with a sentence about a school schedule. Then she did something she rarely did in professional settings. She smiled. "Go," she said. "I'll handle the rest." Nora picked up her bag, took one last look at the dining room. The white tablecloths, the low candlelight, the kitchen door swinging on its hinges as Thomas's team moved through another ticket. Then she walked to the exit and stepped out into the night. The cold hit immediately. The particular Chicago cold that doesn't negotiate. She stood on the sidewalk for one moment, letting it do its work. Then she flagged a cab, got in, and gave the address. The city moved past the windows the way it always did, at this hour, lit and indifferent and entirely itself, carrying on with the 10,000 ordinary things that make up a night in a place that size, unbothered by the specific gravity of any one of them. Nora watched it pass. She was almost home. By midnight, 3 things had been formally established. Ryan Calloway had been processed and charged on 3 counts: fraudulent contract execution, unauthorized use of another party's professional identity, and a pattern of financial concealment that the DA's office had been building a case around for the better part of 6 weeks, well before Saturday evening gave them the occasion to act on it. He had appeared before a duty judge at 11:40 and been remanded without bail on the grounds that the combination of offshore financial structures and the scale of the alleged conduct represented a meaningful flight consideration. The second thing, at 11:45, a family court judge had signed a temporary custody order, placing James Calloway, age 5, in the sole care of his mother, pending the outcome of proceedings. The third thing, Vanessa Marceau had signed her agreement with the DA's office at 11:22, in the presence of her own attorney, a woman she had called from the restaurant's back hallway at 9:30, using the number she had saved in her phone under a name that wasn't Eleanor Walsh, because she had always been careful that way. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony, all potential liability arising from the fraudulent contracts bearing her name had been formally declined. By 1 in the morning, Nora was sitting across from Eleanor in the 14th floor office on West Madison Street with 2 cups of coffee between them and the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has only just been permitted to set it down. Eleanor had her yellow legal pad in front of her. She walked through the evening's outcomes with the efficient clarity of someone who understood that Nora did not need reassurance. She needed information delivered accurately and in order. 3 counts, Eleanor said. The fraudulent agreements are the clearest. Vanessa's testimony establishes intent, and the paper trail Thomas provided gives us execution. The financial concealment charges will take longer to litigate, but the DA's office is confident. She made a note. Bail was denied, which means he stays in custody through the preliminary hearing. That's the timeline we planned for. Nora nodded. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She looked at the screen, a number she recognized. Derek Mills Calloway Group's head of finance calling at 1 in the morning with the particular timing of a man who has been sitting with something since 9:17 and has finally decided to say it. She answered. "Mrs. Calloway, Derek's voice had the careful quality of someone choosing words with more deliberation than usual. I want to apologize. I should have come to you sooner. When I first noticed the discrepancies months ago, before it reached the point it did, I told myself it wasn't my place. That was wrong. Nora listened to this. She considered it. Derek, she said, you came to me when it mattered. That's what counts. A pause. Get some rest. There'll be a lot of work next week. She ended the call and set the phone back on the desk. Eleanor was watching her with the expression she occasionally wore when something confirmed a conclusion she had reached independently. She wrote something on the legal pad, then looked up. The company, she said. What do you want to do with it? Nora looked at her coffee. Outside the window, the city was doing what it did at this hour, quieter than daytime, but never actually quiet. The specific register of a place that doesn't fully stop, only shifts gears. Sell it, she said. Full staff retention, every position written into the purchase agreement as a condition. Non-negotiable. She turned her cup slightly on the desk. Thomas gets his partnership. Whatever the buyers want to call the group is their business. She paused. It was never really mine. I just needed to make sure it couldn't be used the way it was being used, Eleanor wrote. Nodded once. I'll start the outreach Monday. There are 2 groups who've expressed prior interest, Midwest Hospitality, and a private equity firm out of Indianapolis. Given the current ownership structure, we're in a strong position. Whoever retains the staff, Nora said. Whoever retains the staff, Eleanor confirmed. A silence settled between them. The comfortable kind. The kind that 2 people arrive at after a long time, working toward the same thing, and finding themselves finally on the other side of it. Eleanor set down her pen. She looked at Nora across the desk with the directness she applied to everything professional and personal alike. How do you feel? She asked. It was a simple question, the kind that gets asked routinely and answered routinely reflexively, without much thought. Nora opened her mouth and stopped. She sat with it for a moment, actually considered it the way she considered everything, without rushing toward an answer, just because the space required one. I feel like I need to call my son, she said. Eleanor looked at her for a moment, then she picked up her pen and turned back to the legal pad. Go, she said. I'll finish up here. Nora picked up her phone and walked out into the hallway. It was quiet out there, the particular quiet of an office building at 1 a.m, where the cleaning crew had already come through, and the ventilation system was the loudest thing. She leaned her back against the wall beside the door and dialed the number for the woman who had been staying with James since 6 o'clock the previous evening. It rang twice. Then a small voice, thick with sleep, slightly confused, carrying within it all the uncomplicated trust of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to be surprised by the people who love him coming back. Mommy, are you coming home? Nora closed her eyes. She pressed her back against the wall and tipped her head up slightly and held the phone against her ear and listened to her son breathe for 1 second before she answered. Yes, baby, she said. Her voice came out the way it came out when she wasn't managing it, soft, unguarded, belonging to a version of herself that existed only in that hallway at that hour, with that particular small voice on the other end of the line. Mommy's coming home right now. 3 days after that Saturday night, Nora's phone showed a message from a number she didn't have saved. Can we meet? I just want to say one thing. V. She read it twice. Then she typed back an address and a time and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and went back to making James's breakfast. The coffee shop in Wicker Park was the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop caring whether it was fashionable mismatched chairs, a counter that had been refinished, at least twice windows, that let in the flat gray light of a Tuesday morning without doing anything particular with it. Not the kind of place you chose for a business meeting or a celebration. The kind you chose when you needed a room that would not require anything of you. Vanessa was already there when Nora arrived. She had taken a corner table back to the wall sight line, to the door the instinctive positioning of someone who wanted to see things coming. Without the chef's whites and the authority of a professional kitchen behind her, she looked younger than she did at Callaway Prime, smaller. the particular diminishment that happens when you remove a person from the context in which they know who they are. She was not wearing makeup. She had both hands around a coffee cup she hadn't drunk from. Nora came in, unwound her scarf, and sat across from her without preamble. A server appeared. Nora ordered a black coffee and did not look at the menu. Then she folded her hands on the table and waited. This was, she had found, over the years, almost always the most useful thing you could do when someone had asked to speak with you. Simply wait and let them say what they came to say, at the pace they needed to say it. Vanessa looked at the table, then at Nora, then at the table again. "I didn't know about you," she said. "The first 3 months, I genuinely didn't know he was married. When I found out," she stopped, reorganized. "When I found out, he told me it was complicated, that it had been over between you two for years emotionally, and that the rest was just paperwork." Her mouth moved slightly on the last word, something between a smile and the thing that comes just before one. "I told myself it would work out." She set the coffee cup down. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever done," she said. "I knew better. I've always known better. I just—" A pause. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything or change anything. I just needed to say it to your face, because saying it to my attorney, and saying it to the DA, and saying it into the record, felt like saying it to no one." The server returned with Nora's coffee. She thanked him, waited until he had moved away, and then lifted the cup and drank. She had thought on the way over about what she wanted from this conversation, whether she wanted anything at all, or whether she was simply willing to have it, because the woman across from her had asked, and the asking itself seemed to matter. She had not arrived at a clear answer, but she had arrived, which was its own kind of response. "He lied to both of us," Nora said. Her voice carried no particular heat, not the forced calm of someone suppressing anger, but the actual calm of someone who has processed a thing to its conclusion and arrived somewhere past the fire of it. In different ways, for different reasons. The version he gave you and the version he gave me were both constructed to keep him in the position he wanted to be in. She set her cup down. "The difference between you and him is that you eventually told the truth." Vanessa looked at her directly for the first time since Nora had sat down. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. Not as an appeal, as a statement of fact, delivered by someone who had spent 3 days thinking carefully about what was reasonable to expect, and had arrived at an honest answer. Nora looked back at her, across the small table, in the flat gray light of a Tuesday morning, in a room that required nothing of either of them. "I know," she said. "That's why you're not my enemy." The words landed without drama, not a gift, not a verdict, simply an accurate description of the situation as Nora understood it. 2 women deceived by the same person in different configurations, sitting across from each other in the aftermath of it. Not friends, not adversaries, something without a clean category, which was fine. Most true things resisted clean categories. Vanessa looked at her for a moment longer. Something in her face shifted, not relief exactly, but the specific release of a tension that has been held so long the body has forgotten it was holding it. She nodded, just once. Nora finished her coffee. She gathered her coat and her bag and stood the unhurried movement of someone who has said what needed to be said and is leaving because the conversation is complete, not because she is uncomfortable. She walked to the door, at the threshold, without turning around, because what she wanted to say did not require eye contact, only to be heard. She stopped. "You're a talented chef, Vanessa," she said. "Don't let him take that from you, too." The small bell above the door rang as she pushed through it. Outside, the Tuesday morning resumed gray and cold, and entirely ordinary. The city moving at its weekday pace, without any awareness of or interest in the specific gravity of the last 4 minutes. Inside, Vanessa sat with her hands around a coffee cup that was still full and had gone slightly cold in a corner table, in a room that required nothing of her. She breathed in, she breathed out. It was the first time in longer than she could precisely calculate that the simple act of breathing had not felt like something she had to remember to do. The Tribune headline had been running for a week. Thomas Reeves had not read it. He had come back to the kitchen the morning after Sunday before 6, and he had cleaned. Not because it needed cleaning, because cleaning a kitchen is a specific kind of thinking, the kind that keeps your mind exactly where your hands are. A week later, on a Saturday morning, he was still doing it. The prep surfaces were already spotless. He wiped them again. The knife roll was already organized. He reorganized it. Outside, the city was doing its weekend things, foot traffic light delivery trucks still working their routes before the brunch crowd arrived. At 7, he called his father. Gerald answered on the third ring. His voice in the morning had always carried the particular texture of someone who had spent decades talking over kitchen noise, slightly rough, unhurried, built for the long conversation rather than the quick one. "It's done, Dad," Thomas said. He was standing at the prep counter with one hand flat on the stainless steel, looking at the kitchen the way you look at something you have been inside so long you no longer see its parts, only its whole. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. "Did you do the right thing?" he asked. Not "are you okay?" Not "I'm proud of you." Just the question that mattered, asked without decoration, the way Gerald Reeves had always asked the things that counted. Thomas looked around the room. The range his father had cooked on for 15 years. The prep area, where Thomas had done his first real mise en place at 14 hands, too slow knife work embarrassing his father, correcting him with the patient repetition of someone who understood that skill was just time made visible. The walk-in door, with the slight resistance on the handle that everyone who had ever worked here knew to compensate for. "I think so, Dad," he said. A silence, the kind his father used not as absence, but as punctuation. "Then that's enough, son," Gerald said. "That's enough." They stayed on the line another minute, without either of them saying anything further. Then Thomas said goodbye, set the phone on the counter, and went back to work. He heard the back door at 7:40. Nora came in without announcement. Gray wool sweater, hair pulled back, simply the straightforward arrival of someone with other things on her mind. She looked around the kitchen briefly, the same way she had the first time she'd come here 14 months ago, taking stock. She set an envelope on the counter between them. "The sale closed Thursday," she said. "Midwest Hospitality. 30 days to possession." She nodded toward the envelope. 2 non-negotiable conditions written in before signatures. Full staff retention, every position, every person. And your partnership, executive chef and partner. Binding on the new owners regardless of future restructuring. She paused. "There's a second document inside. For your father. The severance Ryan committed to 3 years ago and never paid, with interest from the original termination date." Thomas picked up the envelope. He opened it, the way his father had always opened things, without tearing, as though the container deserved the same attention as its contents. He read the partnership agreement first, then the second document. He read both completely the way you read something when you want to be certain of exactly what it says before you respond. Then he looked up. "My dad spent 15 years building this kitchen," he said. Not as an accusation, not as a sentiment, just a fact the way Gerald himself would have said it plainly, because it was true, and truth needed nothing added to it. Nora looked at him across the counter. "I know," she said. "That's why it deserves someone who remembers that." Thomas held her gaze for a moment. Then he folded both documents carefully along their original lines and slid them into the front pocket of his apron alongside his thermometer and his prep notepad, the working inventory of a chef who intended to keep working. He reached for his knife roll, unfolded it, selected the chef's knife, the one he had bought 6 years ago, resharpened so many times. The blade had narrowed slightly from its original profile. He ran it along the whetstone twice. The sound of steel on stone filled the kitchen clean rhythmic. The sound of a room preparing to be useful again. He set the knife down, took his apron from the hook by the walk-in, tied it in the back with the automatic efficiency of 10,000 repetitions, smoothed the front. "Service at 12, he said. Not to Nora, not to anyone in particular. To the kitchen itself, to the range, and the prep surfaces, and the walk-in with its resistant handle to the room his father had helped shape, and that he intended starting today to run the way it had always deserved to be run. He moved to his station. Behind him, Nora's footsteps crossed to the back door, quiet, unhurried. The door opened, the door closed. Thomas began his prep. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in April, the kitchen smelled like maple syrup and fresh coffee, and the particular warmth of a home that has been genuinely lived in by people comfortable enough with each other to move around without watching where they step. Nora was sitting at the table with both hands around her mug, doing something she had not done in a long time. Nothing. Not reviewing documents, not running numbers, not maintaining the specific vigilance that had been the background condition of her life for the better part of 2 years. Just sitting, just the coffee and the April light through the window, and her 5-year-old son standing on his step stool at the counter, spatula in hand, preparing to attempt something of genuine consequence. James had decided 2 weekends ago that he was old enough to flip his own pancakes. He had studied the technique with the focused attention he applied to anything mechanical, watching, questioning, insisting on holding the spatula during practice runs that did not involve actual batter. Today involved actual batter. He stood very still over the pan brow, slightly furrowed spatula at the angle he had determined was correct. There was flour on the tip of his nose from an earlier stage of the process. Nora did not point it out. She had learned that the most important thing was to be present without intervening, to let him discover he could do something before telling him he could. He slid the spatula under the edge. He paused. He committed. The pancake lifted, turned, landed. James looked at it for 1 full second. Then he turned around with the spatula raised above his head. "Mommy, I did it, just like Grandpa James taught you." "Just like Grandpa James taught me," Nora said. She was smiling before she finished the sentence. Not the managed expression she had maintained through 14 months of meetings and filings, and Saturday evenings that required her to be exactly what the situation needed. The other kind, the kind that arrives without being summoned. A knock at the door. James Hayes came in with a newspaper under his arm and a bag of oranges, because he had always brought oranges and showed no signs of reconsidering. He was immediately required to witness a pancake demonstration before being allowed to sit down. He witnessed it with appropriate gravity. "Good wrist," he told his grandson. "Your technique is sound." James received this with the satisfaction of someone whose assessment has been confirmed by a credible source and returned to the stove for a second attempt. Nora poured her father a coffee. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, smaller than the one in Lincoln Park, already accumulating the character of a surface used every day, a dent near one corner, a mug ring that hadn't been caught in time, a crayon mark along one edge that James had produced and Nora had decided to leave. "The final numbers came through Thursday," she said. 67 staff retained. Thomas signed the partnership. Gerald received the full amount. She turned her mug on the table. "It's done." Her father nodded. He looked at his grandson, now attempting a second flip with slightly more confidence than the first. "Your mother would have been proud of you," he said. Nora looked down at her mug. She sat with it, not deflecting, not filing it away, just holding it the way she had been learning these past 6 months, to hold things that were simply true. Her mother gone since Nora was 19, who had taught her before she had the words for it that a woman's intelligence was not a thing to be made smaller, so that others could feel larger. She smiled at her coffee. She didn't say anything. Small arms wrapped around her legs from the side. James abandoning the stove temporarily to make contact with his mother, the way he did periodically each morning, as though checking she was still there. He looked up at her with the specific, unguarded concern of a child who has learned to read his mother's face and takes the responsibility seriously. "Mommy," he said, "are you okay? You look funny again." Nora looked down at him, flour on his nose spatula in hand, batter on his elbow, that he remained entirely unaware of. The 5-year-old face turned up to hers with complete and uncomplicated attention. She crouched to his level. "Yeah, baby," she said. The voice that came out was unmanaged and entirely her own. "Mommy's okay." She looked at him, really looked. "Mommy's really okay." He studied her face with his full analytical capacity. Apparently satisfied, he turned and went back to his pancakes. Nora straightened. She looked at her father, who was watching her over the rim of his coffee cup with an expression she recognized, not the concern he had worn at her wedding, but something quieter and more complete on the other side of it. She picked up her mug. The April light moved across the table. Outside, the city was waking up to a Sunday, the way it always did, without urgency, at the unhurried pace of a morning that belongs to no one in particular. She hadn't won a war. She had simply refused to lose herself in one. And sitting in that small, warm kitchen, her father's oranges on the counter, her son's pancakes on the stove, the April light doing what April light does, she understood finally and completely that this was not the aftermath of something. This was the thing itself. Now, I want to hear from you. If Nora's story landed somewhere real, if you felt that satisfaction when everything came together in that dining room, tell me what you think. Here's the question. Would you have done what Nora did, made sure the whole city was watching, or would you have taken everything quietly? Built your new life in private and let him figure out the rest on his own? No wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss next week. Because next week, we have a billionaire, a prenup, and a clause buried in the fine print that his entire legal team somehow missed. You do not want to sit that one out. Thank you for listening. And remember, the quietest person in the room is almost never the least dangerous one.